Have you ever smelled something and instantly been transported back in time? Maybe a perfume, a hospital, freshly baked bread, or campfire smoke? Before you even think about it consciously, you can sense your body remembers. Maybe your heart rate changes, your emotion surfaces, a memory appears. That's because your brain doesn't store memories like a filing cabinet. It stores them relationally and associatively. I think we can see something absolutely fascinating in the way that Jesus restores Peter after his resurrection, because Peter denied Jesus beside a fire, and Jesus restores Peter besides a fire. Same sensory cue, different ending. And I don't think that's accidental. I think it's revealing something profound about both the nervous system and the heart of God. Before we jump in, I have a resource for you in the video description. It's my nervous system ladder that you can download. I love to use this tool with my clients because it offers a lot of aha moments to see some of the things that show up that maybe they didn't tie to a fight, flight, or freeze state before looking at the ladder. Let's first go back to Peter's worst moment. You could go to Matthew 26, Mark 14, Luke 22, or John 18 to read those accounts. Also, I think there should be a personality test on what your favorite gospel is, because I always think people's favorite gospels makes total sense based on their personalities. Drop a comment with your favorite gospel. I would love to hear it. Okay, back to the story. So Jesus has been arrested, the disciples scatter, and Peter follows from a distance. Eventually, he finds himself standing around a charcoal fire. It's cold, it's dark, people are asking questions, and 3 separate times Peter denies even knowing Jesus. Then the rooster crows, as scripture tells us Peter wept bitterly. Can you imagine that moment? The shame, the regret, the self-condemnation, not just because he failed, but because he failed Jesus, the man he loved most. Someone who he had followed and learned from daily for the last 3 years. I've been watching Survivor with my kids, and I'm amazed at how quickly they form really strong bonds on that show in just a week. Now imagine that times like 1,000, because we're talking about Jesus, one who had perfect presence and embodied the love of God in him. And their bond, Peter and Jesus, was developed over such a longer time span. So when I talk about Peter's bitter weeping, I can feel it in my bones. Ugh, it makes me ache. For many of us, when we read that story, we focus primarily on the event. But if we really pause on this for a moment, we could sense, even if it's just a fraction of how much the nervous system gets impacted here. And I was really cracking up this morning about poor Peter and his just completely dysregulated nervous system. Y'all, this is the same Peter, right, that cut off a soldier's ears hours before this denial. His system was 100% no doubt in fight or flight. We can see the impulsiveness, the strong reactions happening as a result, and Peter is trying so desperately to find safety through action, which is a hallmark for fight or flight. The point being here is that Peter's nervous system was paying far more attention to just the events occurring. It is also recording all of the context, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the environment, all of it. And we know that our brain could take in 11 million pieces of data in a split second. But when we consciously think about between 70 and 40 bits of that information. One of the things neuroscience has shown us is that memory is deeply sensory. The brain is constantly linking experiences together. Smells become associated with people, songs become associated with seasons, places become associated with emotions. This is why trauma triggers exist. A sound, smell, location, none of those things are dangerous in and of themselves, but the nervous system remembers what happened in relation to those. And the brain's job is prediction, so it's constantly asking what happened before and what should we expect now. And when your system is making an association, our brain prioritizes what we call bottom-up signaling, meaning the lower part of your brain or survival brain takes over and your logical upper cortex takes a back seat. And because relational experiences are so important for survival, the brain pays especially close attention to them, which means Peter's denial wasn't simply stored as information, it was stored as experience. And experiences are remembered through association, including a sensory association. So his failure, a deeply emotional moment, is tied to all of this environmental information. But here's where it gets really interesting. In the gospel accounts, the Greek word used for a charcoal fire is surprisingly rare. It appears during Peter's denial, and it appears again after the resurrection. John could have simply wrote that there was a fire, but he doesn't. He specifically notes a charcoal fire or antharkia. Same smells, same sensory cues, same type of environment. And what happens there? Jesus doesn't shame Peter. He doesn't lecture him. He doesn't make Peter sit through a theological seminar. Instead, he invites Peter into relationship. Breakfast, conversation, connection, presence. Then comes the famous exchange. Do you love me? 3 denials, 3 opportunities to reaffirm love. Not punishment, but restoration. On the first fire, Peter collapses under fear. We associate a collapsed state to numbness, withdrawal, and appeasing. When we consider the context of who Peter had been following and believing deeply in as a Messiah for the past 3 years, and that he had just been murdered, I think a nervous system collapse makes absolute sense here. It's what we would expect. We can see Peter seeking safety through disconnection or hiding. Then around the second charcoal fire, Jesus rebuilds him with love, safety, and connection. Another bunny trail here that I just have to mention is that when Peter hears it's Jesus on the shore, he literally throws himself into the sea to swim for it. I see this as so representative of Peter's desperation for reconnection with Jesus. And I don't know, I'll have to ask Peter about this when we get to heaven, but to me, it reads like that flight energy again. It's a little impulsive, right? But I imagine internally Peter saying to himself, I just have to make things right with Jesus. I must fix this. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. We often use flight energy to our benefit, like if we wake up and we're running late for something and we really need to get moving, for example. My point here is I imagine Peter's nervous system had been stuck in dysregulation since Jesus' death, and he knew he needed that reconnection to return to that ventral vagal or a resilient space where he can embody clarity, compassion, and calm. This is a space where we can actually be for others like we're called to in the Great Commission. And I notice that the church is really good at doing, which is great, but we struggle more with being with people in their discomfort, their pain, or their sin. What really strikes me is how relational Jesus is. Many of us would have approached this differently. Maybe we would have explained forgiveness with Peter. Maybe we would have taught doctrinally, and maybe we would have corrected his thinking. Jesus certainly cares about truth, but he understands something many of us miss. We don't heal only through information, we heal through experience. And the same God who created the nervous system understands the nervous system. The same God who designed memory understands memory. And the same God who created attachment understands attachment. Jesus isn't simply replacing Peter's thoughts, he's creating a new experience in the very place associated with the shame. And I'm sure Peter's nervous system expected rejection, and instead he received acceptance. He probably expected distance from Jesus. Instead, he receives closeness. And he probably expected to be reminded of his failures, but instead he received trust in the form of commissioning. Same cue, different outcome. That's how healing often happens for our nervous system when the place where we hold all of that sensory information gets utilized to instead be a space for restoration and resource. So as you're listening, I wonder what in your life, what memory or experience is a place of rejection, for failure, or shame for you? And can you imagine Jesus in that moment with you, still calling you near to him, saying, "Come, my loved one, you are not this one moment. You can still access me. You are forgiven, and I have wonderful things for you." Because I think so many Christians are carrying their own charcoal fires, places where they failed, places where we've been hurt, or we've done the hurting, places where we feel ashamed, places where we believe that God is disappointed in us. And often we think healing means never revisiting those places, but that avoidance doesn't bring healing. Healing happens when God meets us in there, not to relive the wound, but to create a new experience. One where shame no longer gets the final word. One where our failure is not the end of the story, and one where love is stronger than fear. So after breakfast comes the part of the story that most of us know. Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" And on the surface, it feels like Jesus is simply matching Peter's 3 denials with 3 opportunities to reaffirm his love. And I think that's certainly part of what's happening. Again, we see that mirroring. But I wonder if there's something deeper happening relationally here as well. Remember, Peter isn't standing there as this bold disciple who swore he would never abandon Jesus. He was that man, but now he's standing here as a man who failed. The man who denied Jesus. The man carrying shame. Oof, and shame, my friends, changes how we show up in relationship. From a nervous system perspective, shame is one of the most powerful experiences of social threat. When we feel ashamed, our world gets smaller. We hide, we withdraw, we lower our eyes, we protect ourselves. Because at its core, shame drives disconnection. It says to us, if you really knew me, you wouldn't want me. And Peter has every reason to feel that way, doesn't he? So some scholars have pointed out that Jesus initially uses the word agape, while Peter responds with phileo. Yeah, phileo. I always get that wrong. And there's debate on how much significance should be placed on that distinction. But even if we hold it loosely, I think there's something beautiful to consider here. Agape represents a deep, self-giving love. Phileo represents a friendship, affection, or brotherly love. It's almost as if Jesus is inviting Peter into the fullness of relationship with him. And Peter, still carrying some of the weight of his failure, can only respond with the love he feels capable of expressing. Lord, I know I'm your friend. And I think about how often do I respond to God in that way. God fully knows my story that he's written. He sees all of it, but I don't see it all yet. And sometimes I struggle to connect with all of that. And it's so much easier to relate from the position that I am currently in and to connect from that place. And yet again, Jesus doesn't reject Peter's answer. He doesn't say, "Come back to me when your love is stronger. Come back when your faith is better. Come back when you've fixed yourself." He meets Peter exactly where he is. And then he keeps inviting him forward. Feed my sheep, tend my lambs, follow me. Jesus is connected to Peter's true identity, even when Peter cannot relate to that himself because of nervous system dysregulation. And what if this is what secure attachment looks like? Not demanding more than someone can offer, not shaming them for their limitations, not withdrawing because they're struggling, but staying present while gently calling them forward towards growth. That's how healthy relationships work. And I think that's exactly what Jesus is modeling. He doesn't force Peter into transformation. He creates the safety where transformation becomes possible. Peter's restoration wasn't merely intellectual. Jesus doesn't give him a lecture, he gives him an experience of being fully known, fully exposed, and still pursued. I'd assert that's what allows Peter's nervous system to finally settle enough to become the man that we see in Acts. Jesus did not ignore the failure, but Jesus proved that the failure and shame are not stronger than love and connection. Final thought for today. What I love most about this story is what it reveals about God's heart. Jesus could have restored Peter anyway, on a mountain, in the synagogue, on a road. Instead, he chose a setting that mirrors Peter's deepest failure. And then he rewrites the ending. That is the heart of redemption. Not pretending the wound never happened, not minimizing pain, not bypassing memory, but entering the memory with love powerful enough to transform its meaning. And we can recognize today that that's what Jesus still does. He meets us in places we most want to avoid. And not to shame us, not to condemn us, but to remind us, I know you. I see you, and I'm still here. And that's not just beautiful theology, it's also remarkably good neuroscience. And that shouldn't surprise us. The God who designed the nervous system has always known how healing works.